Good afternoon, everybody, here in Germany at least, and for those that are in the US, for example, good morning. Welcome to the webinar about our second version of PSILCA. What's new in PSILCA version 2? So what do we want to look at in the next more or less 30 minutes is that I want to give you a brief repetition about PSILCA, just to remind you, or for those who may not know the database, what it is about. After that, I want to introduce you the new features and new functions of PSILCA. Then I will briefly say some words about the 3 variants that we offer, and in the end I would like to tell you where you can find some more information and where you can purchase the database. And after the presentation, I will leave time for question and answers. So please, you can write them down in the chat during the webinar, or just note your questions, and I would like to answer them after the presentation. Okay, PSILCA is our product social inventory lifecycle assessment database. And as the name already says, it is a database for social lifecycle assessment. You can calculate and assess social impacts of products along entire life cycles, but you can also detect social hotspots of product life cycles. For example, processes that have potentially high risks or high opportunities regarding specific issues. PSILCA uses Eora as the backbone. Eora is a multi-regional input-output database which is developed in Australia. And it covers information for 189 individual countries that are represented by a total of 14,838 sectors that themselves are classified by their entity, which can be industries and commodities. The interesting thing about Eora, and which is of course then reflected in PSILCA, is that it has a high resolution heterogeneous classification, sector classification, which means that the developers wanted to stick to the individual national sector classification of each country. So that means that for some countries we have really like hundreds of different sectors which can be really detailed, and for other countries we have a 26 sector harmonized classification. This happens for those countries that don't provide really detailed information, or just don't or use themselves a harmonized classification. And of course, as it is inherent to input-output databases, is that the connections between the different sectors are in monetary terms, which is why in the database also the connections between the processes and later between the product systems are also given in monetary terms, so in US dollar. This is the structure of, or the basic structure of the sector country or country sector division in PSILCA. On the one hand, on the left side, you have the 26 harmonized sectors. In this case, they are industries. Here for Afghanistan, so you can see that you have more general sectors like agriculture, construction, hotels and restaurants, mining and quarrying, and so on. So these kind of sectors. And then we have the other extreme, which is the UK, that provide sectors for commodities and industries, and in total they are more than 1,000 detailed sectors. We can see here that these can be really specific, like bars or bookbinding or adult and other education and so on. The social indicators in PSILCA and their structure are mainly inspired by the UNEP CTEC guidance book and their methodological sheets, but also by the pre-roundtable, the ProSuit project, and some own research and studies that we at Green Delta carried out. So the basic structure is that we look at indicators that refer to different stakeholders. In the second version, we cover workers, local communities, value chain actors, society, and consumers as well. Then there are different subcategories that refer to the stakeholders, like, for example, fair salary, discrimination of workers, respect of indigenous rights, and so on. And these subcategories are measured by different indicators, which can be of qualitative, quantitative, or also semi-quantitative nature. So here we can see the indicator structure in openLCA. On the left side, you see how the indicators are categorized. So first on the level of the stakeholders, like here, local communities, workers, society, and so on. Then the subcategories, which are, for example, for workers, child labor, discrimination, fair salary, and then below the different indicators that address the subcategories. And then if we open here an indicator, we see some additional information, like, for example, a description, which can be an explanation of the unit of measurement, and in every case, the evaluation schema, which means how we evaluated the different risk levels. This is, of course, a brief description. There is a very detailed description in the PSILCA manual. The indicators themselves are assessed by an ordinal risk scale of different risk and opportunity levels. Normally, these are from very low risk to very high risks. This can depend a bit on the indicators. For some, there are some risk levels missing because it doesn't make sense, but normally there are 6 risk levels. And the indicators themselves are modeled as elementary output flows per process and already risk assessed. They are quantified by worker hours as the activity variable, and the reliability and validity of the data sets for every process and every indicator flow is assessed by data quality indicators. The data quality on its turn is assessed by a square pedigree matrix, which is based on the study of Weidemar and Wessners. And it is assessed by 5 different data quality indicators, which refer to the reliability of the source and to the conformance of the data set. And then there are 5 different levels of data quality. Both the indicator values and the risk evaluation schemes are provided. This is important, or we consider it as really important, to make the indicator assessment transparent, because in social LCA there's a lot of subjectivity and a lot of context needed. So that is why, yeah, for us it's important to show risk evaluation schemes and the idea behind it. And so this is also a basis for the individual modification of the risk level. So every user can either per flow on the process level change the risk level or the risk evaluation, but also across entire indicators. This is how the indicator or the risk assessed indicators look like in a process in PSILCA. So these are process outputs. And we can see here that, for example, the right of association in this process has no risk. The social security expenditures in the country and regarding the process have a low risks. Trade union density is associated with a high risk, and so on. And then all these risk assessed flows that are, as the name says, that are already assessed, are quantified by their amount of work hours, or in general by the activity variable. And here on the right, we can see the data quality assessment. From 1, which is the best evaluation, to 5, which is worst. So for example, if we look at this indicator, which would be very high or high risk of the presence of sufficient safety measures, so probably there are no sufficient safety measures provided, and the data quality is also quite good. This 4 refers to the geographical conformance. So this helps to assess us or to tell us how reliable this risk level is. And we also provide further documentation on the process level, which refers to, in general, to the source. So for every data set and every process, you can look up the source, some comments, for example, how the specific value was calculated, if there's something that has to be considered, and again the data quality, the risk level, and also the raw value. So for example, here for gender wage gap, we assess it as a high risk, and the raw value is 23.6%. And this is the basis for an individual modification as well. Okay, so that's basically what is PSILCA about and what already existed in the first version. And now I want to come to the innovations and the new things that we have inserted. So first of all, we have updated almost all indicators regarding the sources on the one hand. So we have used more current sources, meaning we might have used the same databases like the ILO standards, for example, but of course newer studies and the data itself. And in some cases, we have also considered other sources because we found other sources that we considered better, or they just came out during the last 3 years. Then, of course, we have used more current values. Normally, yeah, we always used more current values. Maybe if we really considered one source much better than the last one and the value is 1 year older or so, then we might have used an older value, but this is rarely the case. The country and or sector coverage is broader in some cases for some indicators. So yeah, it might be possible that instead of 50 countries, now we have data for 70 countries, or much more sectors, or many more sectors could be covered in a specific country. In some cases, we also defined a new calculation way or method of the indicator values. For example, this refers to those indicators that have to be normalized, like if we have absolute numbers of let's say cases of violations, for example, that occurred in a sector, and we normalize them with the number of employees in the same sector. So these kind of indicators might have been evaluated in or calculated in a new way that, of course, we considered better or more logical. Based on these new methods, but also based on literature or other expert opinions, we used in some cases other risk evaluation schemes. Just the division of the values for specific risk levels might be a bit different. And maybe the risk level or the risk evaluation scheme by itself could have another logic. Yeah, so on the one hand, we might have used simply different levels for the risks, but it is also possible that we defined another underlying logic. All of the changes or modifications are documented per indicator in the manual of PSILCA. So below every indicator, I made a comment regarding the changes to the first version of PSILCA, and then, for example, that in this case more current values were used, the country coverage is larger, and the risk scale was updated. Then, of course, we introduced or we developed new indicators, 12 in total, regarding all the stakeholders. So for workers, we defined women in the sectoral labor force and men in the sectoral labor force, which is measured by a ratio. In these cases, it's the ratio of, for example, women working in a specific sector regarding the overall participation of men and women in this specific sector. So compared to the entire workforce. Regarding value chain actors, we added the indicator social responsibility along the supply chain, which is measured in the number per 100,000 employees of labels and cases that occurred in the sector. Regarding society, we added, for example, life expectancy at birth, which is rather a describing indicator or an indicator that should help to define the context, and contribution of the sector to economic development. And then we also added some indicators that are rather environmentally oriented, which is the contribution of the sector to environmental load regarding different chemicals and emissions, all emissions to air. And we also added in an indicator for consumers, which is the first consumer-related indicator. It refers to the consumer transparency, and it is the presence of business practices deceptive or unfair to consumers. And these are measured based on cases that were reported regarding deceptive consumer practices in the US. So in total, the second version of PSILCA combines 65 indicators that address 19 subcategories and all the 5 main stakeholders that we defined and that also are defined in the UNEP guidelines. In order to help you to identify which indicators are new, I also highlighted this in the documentation as by a green note that this is a new indicator. Another new thing in PSILCA version 2 is that we introduce positive indicators or a positive evaluation. So in this case, it refers to the indicator contribution of the sector to economic development. And these indicators are defined by opportunity levels, which range from low opportunity to high, or to medium to high opportunity, and also no opportunity. For the calculation of impacts and of inventory, the activity variable is a negative one, because in the end the idea is that these positive impacts are subtracted from the overall impact, which we consider normally as a negative impact. So a positive impact kind of improves the overall performance. So this can be seen here in the more in the documentation window, and also here in the outputs of the process. So the other indicators are negative ones, so this is a positive activity variable, and for positive indicators it's a negative activity variable. So this is how a positive indicator result looks like, regarding, of course, the contribution to economic development. And these are here the top 5 process contributions to the final impact. And we see here that all the contributions, of course, are negative. Because in this case, for this indicator, no negative contributions are expected. There might be in the future indicators that could be assessed by risks and opportunities, and then of course we would see here negative impacts, meaning positive values, and yeah, positive impacts which are negative values. This is how the impact assessment or the impact contributions look like. So overall, the impact is, the positive impact of the contribution to economic development is minus 0.095 medium risk hours. And these are the individual processes that contribute to this impact and the flows. So we see in this case there are always high opportunities regarding the sector, which is then measured in these amounts. And the contribution tree would, of course, also be measured by negative contributions. And then here these bars are green, or green bluish, while for negative impacts, we will see this later, there are rather red and orange colors. So green means it's a positive evaluation. Another really innovative thing of openLCA in general, which we also introduced for PSILCA, is that you can now calculate with the data quality, because in the first version of PSILCA, it was, or data quality had rather documentary function, but now we can calculate with it. So openLCA provides a feature where you can see the data quality system. You can define different data quality systems for your database or for different databases. So here we see the system which we use for PSILCA. The indicators are the reliability of the sources, the completeness conformance, temporal conformance, geographical conformance, and further technical conformance. And then the different also qualitative descriptions and qualitative levels of the data quality assessment. So you would see here, for example, regarding geographical conformance, it means if it's a 1, the data comes from exactly the same country. If it's a 2, the information is extrapolated from a country with similar conditions or an average of countries with slightly different conditions. 3 is also an average of countries but with more different conditions, and so on. So you can see here the meaning of the data quality values. And then when you calculate data quality, you can select here your system or your flow schema, the aggregation type. So if it's a weighted average or a squared weight, for example, how should it be? How should the values be rounded? And what should we do with if we have no values? And then we get data quality results on the inventory level and on the impact level. So this is here shown the inventory results. Here for the indicator, for example, presence of sufficient safety measures. In total, for high risk, for example, there are 0.0054 hours included, and we see that the data quality in average is quite good. This means the 4 is for geographical conformance, which you can see here from the abbreviations. So this means that the country evaluation is not so good, it's rather an average. But for example, here for sanitation coverage, we see that data quality is really good, and the technical conformance was not possible because this refers to a country-related indicator. And the same can be done on the impact level. So overall, we would see here, for example, different impact results, which can be interesting, for example, when you compare different product systems, and you on the one hand can compare impact results in total, but also the quality. And it's then up to you how you include the data quality. If you say, for example, here for the indicator contribution to environmental load, or women in the sectoral labor force, we see that data quality is really good. So probably these results are quite reliable. While, for example, for certified environmental systems, you might consider the data quality not such good, and results should be looked at in a more critical way. And an additional point in the version 2 of PSILCA is that we also added a new activity variable, which is value added. It's not, we would see if we will be able to provide it within the same database, so that you can switch between worker hours and value added, or at least that we can predefine some indicators where you choose, or where we would recommend value added, and for others worker hours. But to start with, we will provide 2 different PSILCA versions that are available for those that have a license. One with worker hours as activity variable, and the other one with the value added. And this looks the same as in the other type. So here the indicator, the risk assessed indicators are quantified by the amount of the activity variable. So in this case, it's value added, which is measured in US dollar. And the value added in this case is simply the difference between the inputs or the sum of the inputs and the outputs of each process in PSILCA. So calculated out of the input-output database Eora. And here some results or some first comparison. Here impacts calculated by or with the value added activity variable, and here with the working time as activity variable. And then we can see that, for example, I just ordered it here alphabetically, but we can see that the numbers are, of course, quite different. And also the order between the different impact categories is probably different, and the relation between the categories. So based on these results, one can decide if it makes more sense for some impact categories or for all impact categories to use the value added or the worker hours approach. This probably also depends a bit on the goal and scope of the study, and also on the indicator. And these are impact contributions, so also here on the top calculated with the value added, and on the bottom with working time. And we can see here, for example, that for the risk of association and collective bargaining rights, the process contributions are similar, or the order is similar. So the first three contributions are the same sectors, but for example, here, which is really low, or has a really low contribution, is distilleries. And here on the fourth place, there is food and beverage services, for example. So, and this is really logical that the value added or the activity variable specifically influences the process contributions, because they scale the process importance within the life cycle or the product system. Another example was calculated here for fair salary, the indicator of or the impact of fair salary. And we can also see by simply looking at the graphs that the distribution of the top 5 process contributions is different. And in this case, also the most important processes are different. So the most important one is the manufacture of beverages process, but then regarding value-added restaurants are highly important, and for working time it's accommodation and restaurants, for example. Yeah, so just to show an example how the contributions can be different. And some words for the life cycle impact assessment. You know that in social LCA there are no generally accepted or scientifically checked impact assessment methods available. So we just provide a really simple method that can be changed easily and individually. But we changed a bit the factors in this second version. We gave them an exponential scale ranging from 0.01 for very low risk to 0.1 for low risk. Medium risk is still the reference risk with 1, and then 10 and 100 for the higher risks. So here we give basically more importance to the high risks in comparison to the low risk. But this is, of course, in openLCA, you can change it easily or just define a totally new impact assessment method. And some words to the PSILCA variants. This has not changed in the second version. But to remind you which features are available in the 3 different types, which are the starter, the professional, and the developer types. And they are distinguished by the completeness of the data regarding their valuation basis, so regarding the information that is that can be seen, the data quality information, and the applied cutoff criterion. So this is just a table that shows you the differences. For example, the risk assessed indicators, so the output flows and general information about sources and comments are available in all the types. But for example, raw values are not available in the starter types, but in the professional and developer variant. And data quality is only available in the developer type. So also the calculation or the assessment of the impacts across the entire product system with data quality is only possible with the developer type. And then, of course, based on the info or on the raw values that are provided or that are not provided in the starter type, you are not able to change the overall risk evaluation schemes in the starter type, but you can still individually, like manually, change risk assessments on a process level. And the cutoffs are different between the 3 types. So the starter one is easier to handle in smaller computers, and then the developer type gives you the possibility to calculate really big product systems, or even not, and you can insert a cutoff, an individual cutoff. Okay, where can you find more information? On the one hand, if you want to purchase in the database or a license and get some general information, you can just visit our Nexus online shop and find here information about the different license types and prices. And for the description of the, really the detailed description of the indicators, what is new in the second version, how did we come up with the risk evaluation, also the attribution of data to indicators. All this information can be found in the PSILCA manual, which from next week on, I would say, can be downloaded from our openLCA website, here under Learning and Support and then Databases, or on our PSILCA website, which is PSILCA.net, where you can also find it and download it, and also other information. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you got an idea now of PSILCA and the new features. And now I'm open for your questions. Okay, I see one from Tamar. How were all various units converted into working time or value added?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Well, you have many different indicators with different measuring units, like percent GDP or number of employees. But eventually, if I understand correctly, they're all evaluated as in work hour units.
Yeah, the original units, like as you mentioned, percent or share of GDP or whatever, they help us, or they are the basis for the risk evaluation. And the activity variable, which is worker hours or value added, it refers to, or it helps us to scale or to measure the importance of a process regarding the entire life cycle. And that's also the reason why it is always the same for all the risk assessed indicators. That's the basic idea of the activity variable, that it measures the process importance. And it is calculated So for detailed information how work hours are calculated, you can look it up in the manual. But basically, it's calculated as the time one worker has to, or workers have to work in order to produce $1 of output. And the value added, as I mentioned, is just the difference between the sum of the inputs and the output of a process. So it's really just output minus inputs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, for those who have purchased the first version of PSILCA, is there a way to update to the second version, or should it be new purchase for the second version? Now, this is of course included in the maintenance. So if you still have a valid maintenance, then you get the second version. And if not, you can just update your maintenance, and then you would get the second version. So you don't have to purchase an entirely new database. The same applies for if you want to update, for example, a starter type to a professional type or to a developer type, then of course you only pay the difference and you don't have to purchase a new database.
Mathilde Bian from RDC. I'm not familiar with the database. It was the first presentation for me. If we were to use it, what's the input data that do we call a process in kilogram and everything is converted into working hours, and then everything you presented works its way through the impact assessment, or do we have to enter working hours? How does it work if we have to model?
You mean if you have specific data, if you want to model a specific life cycle assessment and then combine it with PSILCA?
Yes, well, if I want to measure the social impacts of, let's say I'm purchasing a piece of textile in Bangladesh and I want to, and it's 2 kilograms, and I want to know what are the stakes, how do I do it? Do I have to enter working hours, or do I have to enter 2 kilograms of textile?
Yes. I explained this quite in detail in the last webinar, which is available on our YouTube channel. But basically what you need to do is, within your foreground system, it doesn't really matter what unit as inputs you use. So you can just choose items, for example, or price, or even kilograms, as long as it refers correctly to the output. And the indicators, yes, they need to be measured in the same activity variable as the other indicators in the database. So for the output indicators, you would need to calculate worker hours, which you can do, for example, if you have the wage of the employees and working time, for example, if they earn a specific amount of money and they work 40 hours a week, then out of this you can calculate the worker hours per $1 output. And on at the moment that you connect your foreground system with the database, you need to define kind of a conversion factor, which would be the price. So let's say if you connect it at the point of cotton production, then you would need to know, or you need to know how much cotton is an input in the garment or in your final t-shirt, and how much this costs. So in social LCA databases, this is still connected via prices based on the input-output databases that lie behind the social assessment.
Thank you, Francisca, for the very clear presentation and very interesting features of the new PSILCA.
Thank you.
And my question is about the indicator for the positive evaluation. if I understood correctly, it's the fact of assigning a negative value to the activity variables mean that at the end I have an aggregated value which compensates the negative, so the positive impact with the negative one. So, but isn't there the risk that I could hide some negative impact elsewhere in my life cycle overall, or do I have always the opportunity to break down the result in order to see where I have this positive risk or impacts?
Yes, that's a good question. I just wanted to explain the idea that is behind the fact that we put or that we assess the opportunities by a negative value, because this can be sometimes a bit confusing. But of course, results are still, so impacts and inventory results are still provided for every indicator itself. So here you only see the result for the contribution to economic development, which is overall a positive impact measured by this negative value. But in this case here, no negative risks or negative impacts are hidden. So this is just the idea if maybe in future time we will combine some impacts or try to assess impacts on a more endpoint level. But basically here in PSILCA nothing is hidden. So the result is only provided for this indicator, which in general is assessed by the positive evaluation scale.
Okay, and just related to this one, how the opportunity level is measured. I mean, I saw that it's measured in terms of low, medium, or high opportunity, but if there is sort of reference for classifying what can be considered as a medium or low opportunity, or like you have for the risk.
Yes, so the unit of measurement is the share of GDP, so the contribution of the sector to the gross domestic product. And as for all the other indicators, we normally based our evaluation on the equal distribution, or well, basically the distribution of the values. Yeah, so I think until percentage of 10, so the contribution of 10% to the GDP of the sector, it's still low opportunity, and then to 25%, it's medium opportunity, and everything higher is high opportunity, which is our proposal for the opportunity evaluation. But of course, this can be adapted from the individual users, by the individual user. Then there is a question from Mark Göttkop. How does this database compare with the social hotspots database? Yeah, this is a more general question, but I think the main differences are the transparency, so that we try to provide basic information about the indicators, so the risk evaluation scheme, directly in the database and in the software, and of course the data quality information and the raw values, which, as far as I know, are not provided in the social hotspots database. And then of course the underlying input-output database is another one. In social hotspots they use the GTAP, which of course then leads to another sector structure and to other monetary connections. So you will, as always, when you use different databases, you will probably get some different results. The next question is PSILCA split out of the social hotspots database, or is it advanced than the social hotspots database? Yeah, I think maybe I have already answered your question. So it's a totally different database. It has nothing to do with the social hotspots. Of course, it's a similar approach, but it's a new database. Another question: if a user wants to include additional social indicators as a result of specific study, do he or she has to provide information about the value added or working hour for making it consistent with the other indicators in the database? Yes, I would say this is necessary because the worker hours or value added is the basis for the final calculation. So the inventory, for example, is only calculated with the worker hours, which is equivalent to any other unit and amount in other databases. And then the impacts, of course, are calculated using the worker hours and the impact assessment factor. And of course, the price as the monetary connection, which of course also scales the importance of the process. So yeah, I would say this is necessary. Okay, there's another question. As being research institutes, it looks like at least professional variant is suitable. Yes, I would recommend the professional type or even the developer type. But of course, it depends what you want to use the database for. So, for example, for screening ideas or purposes, you can also use the starter type in order to just see where are potential hotspots, what could be impacts in general, or comparing different sectors. But of course, if you want to also to assess the data quality and use it for specific case studies, or of course even change risk evaluations, then probably the professional or developer types are better suiting. Does this new database work also in SIMAPRO, and what are the differences between the operating systems? Yes, thank you for this question as well. It works in SIMAPRO. We have, of course, also updated the SIMAPRO license. But the thing is that SIMAPRO doesn't provide the features we need for some of the PSILCA functions. For example, the calculation with data quality and also the possibility to add data quality on a process level. So this information cannot be provided. So basically, we always say that the SIMAPRO version of PSILCA is equivalent to the starter type of PSILCA. And if you purchase any license of PSILCA, you will always get the SIMAPRO version as well. And then I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a nice Christmas time.